from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 1, verses 40 through 45. Jesus heals a man with leprosy. A man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus was indignant. He reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said. "Be clean." Immediately the leprosy left him, and he was cleansed. Jesus sent him away at once with a strong warning. "See that you don't tell this to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing, as a testimony to them." Instead, he went out and began to talk freely, spreading the news. As a result, Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but stayed outside in lonely places. Yet the people still came to him from everywhere. May the Lord add his blessing and understanding to the reading of this holy word. This will be a time when we're going to talk about a couple of things. We're going to talk about leprosy. We're going to talk about Jewish law. We're going to talk about the medical view of leprosy, the biblical view of leprosy, and Jesus' view on this dreaded disease that alienated people. So we learned that Jesus, before this scripture, I'd like to go back a little bit to set the stage, if you will. Jesus was traveling throughout Galilee preaching in the synagogues. His popularity grew so much that he would seek refuge in the wilderness where he could be alone and pray and decompress and have time alone with God. So as we look back a few verses, Jesus heals many people, including Simon's mother-in-law. In verse 32 through 34 it reads, "That evening after sunset, the people brought Jesus, all the sick and demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door, and Jesus healed many who had various diseases and drove out demons." For the many accounts of healing by Jesus in Mark's Gospel, the underlying theme is that Jesus was a gifted teacher and came to understand that his best approach to spreading God's word was on the outskirts of the cities. By doing so, he was perceived as less of a threat to the established hierarchies within the cities. Even still, the crowds came and caught up to Jesus. The needs of the many would be a drain on him, on his humanness. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Simon and his companions went to look for him, and when they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone's looking for you." Jesus replied, "Let us go somewhere else, to the nearby villages, so I can preach there also. This is why I have come." Jesus came to teach and preach. He got sidetracked by healing and helping. So before long, a man with leprosy came to Jesus, begging him to have his ailment, his horrible ailment, cured. The man's appeal was, "If you are willing," maybe in a challenging way, "if you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus was a little taken back by that. As the man approached, he was probably a little angry that the work of another person, maybe possessed, was yet again coming towards him, but filled with compassion. And at the risk of making himself ritually unclean, and exposing himself to this disease, Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. He said, I'm willing. Be clean. And immediately, the disease left him. Before this miraculous healing, it would have had consequences. Someone would find out. Someone would know he's at it again. Jesus didn't hold back anything. We don't know if the man was coming to seek the Lord or just coming to be healed. We have seekers in this world today who want to come to the Lord. There was a man who was lost and stumbled across a baptism service on a Sunday morning, on a Sunday afternoon, down by a river. He proceeded to stumble down into the water and stand next to the minister. The minister turned and noticed the man and said, "Mister, are you ready to find Jesus?" The man looked back and said, "Yes, sir, I am." The minister then dumped the man into the water and pulled him right back up and asked him, "Have you found Jesus?" The man said, "No, I didn't." The minister dunked him under again a little bit longer, brought him back up and said, "Now, brother, have you found Jesus?" "No, I did not." A little upset, the minister dumped him and held the man under for, 25, maybe 30 seconds, and brought him up and said, "For the grace of God, have you found Jesus yet?" And the man wiped his eyes and pleaded and asked, "Are you sure this is where he fell in?" Kind of like that sometimes. So, there's two views in this message this morning about leprosy. There's the medical view that we've heard about, and people still get treated for it to this day, and then there's the biblical view. The medical view, leprosy, was known as Hansen's disease. The term Hansen's disease was not given until 1873 by a gentleman by the name of Gerhard Hansen. He described the leprosy. It's actually a bacteria. Only at this point was a precise definition of leprosy made available. Many have thought leprosy to be a disease of the skin, but it's better classified as a disease of the nervous system, because that's where the bacteria attacks underneath. The biblical view of leprosy back then, leprosy is a broader term than Hansen's disease that we know today. The Hebrew noun is sarat. It's T-Z-A-R-A-A-T-H. Sarat. It describes the disfigurative conditions of the skin, the hair, the beard, down to clothing, and wool and linen, and even into the stones of the home. They consider that a mold. Now all these can be found in Leviticus chapter 13 and 14. You can do that reading on your own. I'm not here to talk about that this morning, but that's where it came from in the Torah, Old Testament. The Hebrew Tazat included a variety of ailments, primarily uncleanliness or imperfections according to their law, according to their standards, which again can be found in Leviticus 13 and 14. References have a different emphasis in the New Testament. They stress God's desire to heal. Jesus freely touched people with leprosy. While people with that disease traditionally suffered banishment from family and neighbors, Jesus broke that tradition. He treated lepers with compassion, touching and healing. And here there's a hint of why. Jesus said to the man, "Go, continue on with the tradition," which I'm going to speak about, "and don't brag about it." Because Jewish law said an individual with this eruption must visit a specific person known as a Kohen, a K-O-H-N, who was a male possessing direct lineage to Aaron, the the high priest and brother of Moses. This goes back to the Old Testament when people were disease-ridden, and Aaron was charged with doing the healing. So the lineage of the Cohen came from there. They were trained in examining the lesions and diagnosing the sarat. The examiner of the lesion would determine whether or not it meets the specifications. If during the initial examination the characteristics of the lesion met the criteria, the Cohen will declare the individual ritually impure. Again, building up to why Jesus told the man, just go and make those offerings. So once they're identified, this condition is identified, they are now given a label. The label is Metzora, M-E-T-S-O-R-A. That now describes the individual under Jewish law who has leprosy as diagnosed by the Cohen. We all together on this? So now, the person, the Metzora, washes all their garments from impurity, they shave off all their hair, then they wait 7 days to begin the final steps of his or her purification ceremony. On the 7th day, they wash the garments he or she had been wearing from the impurity, and again shaves off all their hair. And then on the 8th day, the Metzora brings three animal sacrifices to the temple. Jesus said, go and make the sacrifices to the temple. And those sacrifices are a sin offering of a female lamb, and a guilt offering and a burnt offering, both male lambs. 3. After that, when the priest had certified that the sarat had been cured, the biblical text required the formerly infected person undergo a number of ritual events. The first group of requirements are that the formerly infected person makes a sacrifice of a bird and prepares a mixture of various ingredients. This is pretty technical stuff. Then, the requirements are, having completed the first part, the formerly infected person is required to avoid their home for a week, can't go home. After which they must shave off all their hair again, including their eyebrows. They wash themselves. Having done that, the formerly infected individual was required to make a standard whole offering, a standard sin offering, and a standard guilt offering. Whew. I'd take the Cliff Notes version. But this was significant. This was significant because that's how they lived prior to Jesus coming into their world. That's how they lived in this prescribed manner. And Jesus says the individual with the ailment or the possessed person or the person who may have deceased and was going to come back is made known to Jesus. Jesus, my brother's dead. Jesus, I have 2 brothers, they're blind. In his own way, Jesus may examine or ask questions to the individual, then may declare the person either touching them or commanding them or even praying. That individual is healed, no longer possessed by a demon. See, it's the miracle of Jesus' healing procedures and the instant reaction of maybe a newfound faith, maybe a rebirth of faith, or maybe some redemption in that person's life. The joy associated with Jesus is sometimes short-lived due to an inattention to details. All I said is, I healed you. Now go make those offerings. Just go there, make the offering, so it's all right. Don't tell anyone I did this. Follow the instructions to the letter. That way you honor me for the gift I gave you. There was never any prerequisite or condition, save for a question, do you want to be made well? There was a never paid up front before I heal you. There was never a policy or to pay for being saved or served. There was never take a number, and when they call your number, then you can come. There was never a re-examination. Quite often the quote was, "Get on with your life because your faith has healed you." In Matthew's case, verse 20, 2 blind men received their sight because Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes. Immediately they received their sight, and then they followed him. In Mark chapter 5, the woman stricken with bleeding for 12 years, hemorrhaging for 12 years, just touched his garment, and she was healed. And all he said to her was, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." Remember her walking along desperate. Appropriate touching is one of the top 3 importances of humankind, realized by a study of doctors. Along with survival and safety, touching is a human need. Infants deprived of touching fail to thrive and grow. Even if they get proper food and nourishment and protection, they fail to thrive and grow. Touching is most powerful by appropriate skin to skin, like a handshake, maybe a kiss on the cheek, to feel connected and cared for. Let's face it, we all need to be hugged and touched. Right? Hug your grandmother, hug your mother, hug your father. We need that. In fact, a noted psychologist, Virginia Satir, now this was her study, suggested that we need from 4 to 12 hugs a day. I mean, in any professional sport, they get it, right? You say bowling one now, they get it. 4 to 12 hugs a day. It seems to me that Jesus knew who the adversaries would be. And in his way, or rather, in God's way, Jesus knew no boundaries to help those in need, either physically, mentally, spiritually. That's the message I've come to appreciate. With God, there are few conditions. With God, there are few conditions. We apply conditions to God's unconditional love. We apply conditions to God's unconditional love. I can't come in. I'm sorry, I can't come in. Gotta go through that way. We apply conditions to God's unconditional. God said, "You should put no other one before me." God also said, "Love your neighbor as yourself." Ever sit next to someone a little more fragrant than yourself on the sub, on the plane, in a car? You should love your neighbor as yourself. We all know about hurting and hating because we see it and read about it every day. It can foster and fuel discord and discontentment. I know it's a slow day in our lives when the news story from Friday night is the news story on Sunday morning. That can be a good thing. It's still talking about people struggling. But to me, that says maybe for a little bit the world has kind of calmed down, just for a moment in time. Jesus inspired people to put their faith and trust in God and not rely on man-made prescriptions or transgressions. We ask and pray for forgiveness. And maybe more times than not, the most difficult part can be accepting the fact that we're forgiven. Accepting the fact that we're forgiven. There are very few treatments or rituals to our healing with God as our physician. There's very few requirements. We stand as Christians united and ready to help those in need, right? We're ready to help those in need. Through our various outreach programs. You have missions program, you have diaconate, you have a praying ministry, prayer warriors. I guess I'm going to say that. Yeah. You have different outreach. You have youth group, music ministry. God bless the music. Any type of volunteer ministry is a window to the community. It's a two-way window. We see out, they see in. Any voluntary ministry is a cornerstone and a visible sign of the church's spiritual health as viewed by the public. We are taught by Jesus these principles that enrich humankind with compassion, respect, dignity, humility, and most important, love. Each of us resembles God's character when we show love and mercy to someone who is in need. God is keenly aware each time you allow Him to shine through you. Every instance when you have compassion for others, is a reflection of your love for God. The reflection of your love for God. A couple of thoughts. Sin, S-I-N, is more than a three-letter word. It has additional spellings. Discrimination, isolation, dislocation, alienation, love. Love is more than a four-letter word. It's compassion, caring, understanding. Ooh, understanding. Christopher Paolini said, a negative outlook is more of a handicap than a physical injury. Judging. How much more are we able to do for God if we are not willing to love unconditionally? What does that mean? I heard in your announcement you're a conservative Christian Bible-based church. That's how you've identified yourself. So your love is the same as a liberal church? All unconditional? I don't know. I'm not asking, I'm just making it up. All right. We have to put ourselves in our comfort zones, because that's where we grow up, that's where we were nourished. And then when we go outside our comfort zone, ooh. My dad said one time, son, there'll be a time in your life, when you forgot to say there's going to be a lot of times in your life, but there's going to come a time in your life when you're going to come across a certain thing and you're not going to want to do it. But you do whatever you can to get through. And when you do, you'll feel good inside. That's right. Right? When we push hard in sports, push hard at work, push hard in family, being a kid or having kids. Unconditional love. We know in John chapter 13, Jesus was with his disciples, and he said, when he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. Jesus said, do you understand what I have done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. We have been blessed. Even though we may have had or may continue to have difficult, unimaginable, and even heart-wrenching experiences. Our hurts, anguish, and heartaches can be debilitating. Let's face it. It can cause us an unintentional disconnection from everyone around us. Unintentional disconnection. Jesus' disconnections were intentional, so he could go rejuvenate and pray to the Lord to fill himself back up again. That might be next week's sermon. I think I'm going to preach that next week. It's not that we don't think anyone cares, but it's maybe our time for solitude. Ever want just a quiet moment? Just give me 5 minutes to unplug, to recharge. The old 12-minute nap. Geez, I could take a 12-minute nap and feel like I slept for 8. In fact, it's more energizing than trying to sleep for 8. So, Anne Frank wrote, "Human greatness does not lie in wealth or power, but in character and goodness. People are just people, and all people have faults and shortcomings. But all of us are born with a basic goodness. We all have it. It's an inherent thing. We all have it. We realize that it is our part of our God-given basic goodness as we gather here this morning to worship and for fellowship together, giving thanks and praising God. When we sing the doxology, hear the words and let them fill your spirit with grace, mercy, and love as your own personal testimony. Jesus is our ultimate wounded healer, and yet he lives on in us and works through us. We can be reassured by his words. Jesus is our ultimate wounded healer, and yet he lives on in us and works through us. In the words of Henry Nouwen, we are all wounded healers. Yes, we are all wounded healers. Gilbert Chesterton wrote, "To love means loving the unlovable. To love means loving the unlovable. To forgive means pardoning the unpardonable. Faith means believing the unbelievable. And hope means hoping when everything seems hopeless." A small gesture of love and compassion can go a long way. It inspired Nelson Mandela to offer this in one of his speeches. "No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin, or his or her background, or his or her religion. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can learn to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than the opposite." What kind of words and acts can you offer to those who are suffering around you? Out beyond these doors. At Home Depot. At your supermarket. On Route 3. In work. Family. Family's one of the hardest, most challenging. We love you. I love you, but don't come back. Jesus touched the man and said, "You're free. You're free." His theology, God divinely given healing, was different than what they were used to. That's why when Jesus was given up, he had to go outside of the towns where it was safe, but people still came. May the Lord continue to inspire each and every one of you each day when you come to the challenge. That's going to be one of the most difficult things you're ever going to face at this particular time in your life. And when you've accomplished it, just by saying, "Hi, can I help? I haven't talked in a while. You need some help today?" You feel better inside. That's our call. That's our charge. We pay it forward. May the grace and the love and the mercy continue to be in your lives as it is in mine each and every day.